Hilchos Shabbos, Perek Shmona ve'esrim. The laws of Shabbos, chapter 28. Today we have another chapter dealing with the mitzvah which we began to discuss yesterday, that of Tchum Shabbat, the border of Shabbos. A person can only walk outside of his city, an area of 2,000 amot, 2,000 cubits, roughly 3,000 feet. Biblically it used to be more. You can walk 12 mil, about 12 kilometers. The rabbis pushed it back, only 2,000 amot. And yesterday, the Rambam discussed different situations where a person can find himself in the beginning of Shabbos and how that affects the tchum. If you're in a city, you can walk the entire city plus 2,000 amot. If you end up outside of a city, just 2,000 amot from where you are. And he also discussed cases where a person left the tchum willingly or unwillingly, in which cases he can come back, in which cases he cannot, and the laws governing that. Today, the Rambam discusses also two more topics related to this concept. Number one is extensions of a city. Although we think of a city as being just the city, there are ways halachically to extend the city and to only begin counting the 2,000 amot after the extensions. And also the Rambam will talk about how exactly do we measure the 2,000 amot. What's included in the distance outside of a city of the 2,000 amot. And here we go, let's get right to it. Halacha Aleph, Kol beit dira shehu yotzei min hamdina. Any home of dwelling, any structure that was made for living in, that's outside of the city, im haya beino uven hamdina, shiv'im ama u'shnei shlishei ama, if between the city and it there was a space of 70 amot and 2/3, shehu tzela bet satayim hamerubat, which would be a side of a square bet satayim. Bet satayim is an area which we had earlier in the laws of Shabbat when it came to defining an enclosed space. The biggest enclosed space that you can carry in all around is 100 by 50 amot, an area for 2 se'ah of grain to grow. 100 by 50 is a rectangle. If you take the square amah-age of that, which is about 5,000 amot, and you try to put it into a square, there is no square root of 5,000, but it's roughly 70 and 2/3 by 70 and 2/3. So the area of 70 and 2/3 is the side of a bet satayim, of an area of 2 se'ah, hamerubat, if you put it into a square. O pachot mizeh, or less. So if there's 70 and 2/3 amot, or less, between the city and this structure, we attach it to the city, and it's considered to be part of the city. And when you measure for the city, 2,000 amot in each direction, we begin to measure only from this city. In other words, we look at it as though the city extends all the way till this line. This becomes the line, and from here begins the 2,000 amot measurement for this city as well. So if somebody was walking out of this city, he would actually have about 2,000, let's call it, and 70 amot, a little more space than regular, because the city is considered to extend all the way until here. Let's say you had one structure that fits the bill. It's within 70 amot of the city. And then you have a second home within 70 amot of the first home. And a third home in the space of 70 amot from the second home. Even if it goes for a walk of many days, the entire thing is considered to be like one city. When we measure the Tchum Shabbat for the city, we begin the measurement from outside of the last structure, living structure. Provided that this home or this little structure has the legal status of a home, which is that it has to be 4 by 4 amot in space, about 6 by 6 feet. Halacha Gimel, there are other structures that count as living quarters. If you have a shul that has a living quarter for the chazan to sleep in, even a home of idol worship, where there's living quarters for the priests who serve in these idol worship homes, or if there's a storehouse that has a place for somebody to sleep in, or if there's a bridge or a grave that might have a living quarters next to it for watchmen, let's say. Or even if there's a structure of 3 walls, even with no roof, but there's a space between them of 4 by 4 amot, they have burganin, and burganin, they say here, the Rambam translates elsewhere as watchtowers. They have bayit habanui bayam, or a home that's built on the sea, in other words, on an island within the sea. Or if you have even a structure of just two walls, but there's a roof on top of them, or if there's a cave that has a little structure on top of it with a place to sleep, all of these count as a structure, and if they're within 70 amot of the city, they can combine to the city. All of these combine to the city if they were within the space of 70 amah and some. And from that home which extends, we treat it as though there's a thread that stretches from here all the way across the length of the city. And we begin to count the 2,000 amot from outside of that strand. The following things actually don't combine with the city, even though they're somewhat of a structure. If you have two walls, but there's no roof, so even though the two walls kind of divide the space, it demarcates somewhat of a space, but since there's no roof, and even people live in between those two walls, doesn't count. And a bridge or a grave or a shul or an idol worshipping home or a storehouse, all these cases where they don't have living quarters in them, or a pit or a ditch or a cave, and a birdhouse, and a home that's built on a boat, a houseboat, not on an island, all of these structures do not combine to the city, even if they're within those 70 required amot, and they don't extend the city's limits. If you had two cities, one next to another, if you have 141 and a third amot between the two, such that you can count 70 amot and some this way, 70 amot and some that way, even if there's no structure in the middle, we consider them to be both one big city, such that anybody in one city can go all the way across to the other city, walk the entire distance of that city, plus 2,000 amot outside of that city. By the way, this is the situation mostly today. If we live in urban areas, one city kind of opens to the next city, opens to the next city. It's only when you go further out and you're dealing with long highways between developed areas that you would have these laws even today of Tchum Shabbat. If you had three cities in a triangle, and here's how the commentaries explain this diagram. It's not a necessarily even triangle on all three sides. It's two over here and one further down. Im yesh ben ha'emtza'i uben kol echad ve'echad min hachitzonim alpayim ama o pachot mikan. Two conditions have to be met. Number one, drawing a line from where the city currently is till the two cities has to be 2,000 amot or less between the cities. That's number one. And uben hashnayim hachitzonim 283 pachot shlish. And between these two, there has to be a total of less than 283 amot minus a third. Why that number? Such that between this city and the middle city, if we could imagine that it would be down here, there would be 141 amot and a third. If those two requirements are met, all three become like one city, and we can measure the 2,000 amah square outside all three. So anybody here can walk all the way to this city, all the way to that city, and begin 2,000 amot outside of the city. In other words, the idea being like this: whenever you have two cities, that Rambam just said before, that if there's 141 and a third amot between them, then you're good. They become like one city. So imagine bringing down this city to this level. If there's 141 here and 141 here, then they all become like one city. So long as in actual distance, there's less than 2,000 amot. Because if there'd be more than 2,000 amot, we can't bring this city down even in an imaginary world. Because there's a tchum between here and here. There's more than 2,000 amot between here and here. But once it's less than 2,000 amot, so it's already within the tchum, now we can imagine it being down here. And if they're close enough, then all three become like one big city. Ir shehu kfa ulevasof yoshva. A city which first had walls built and then was inhabited by homes. Modedin lam yeshivata. We don't count from the walls, we count from the homes. Yashva ulevasof hukfa modedin lam mechomotea. But at first the city was settled and then the wall was built around it. The wall is considered to be an extension of the city, and we count the 2,000 amot beginning from the walls. Halacha vav. Says the Rambam, Ir shahaita aruka o merubat. If a city was elongated, it was rectangular, or it was perfectly square, ho'il v'yesh la'arba zaviyot shavot, since it has 4 equal corners, manichin ota kemot shehi, we leave it as is, umodedin la'al payim amal l'chol ruach me'arba ruchotea, and we count. Oh, where's that picture from yesterday? Oh, square city. Here's a square city. We leave it as is, we don't do any adjustments, and we simply count 2,000 amot in each area square. Haita agula, but if the city was round, as in this picture over here on the right, osin la zaviyot, we first make imaginary corners to the city. We convert it into a square. That's the inner square that you're seeing over here. And then, we imagine the city, the circle city, as though it's in a square. And then we count from the sides of that square 2,000 amot in each direction, which gives you a gain of the corners. See now, if you're on this edge of the city here, you can end up walking way more than 2,000 amot, because you have 2,000 just from the edge of your imaginary square. So you got all this plus 2,000 amot. Same thing if it was a triangle on the left side over here. Or it has many sides. It's pentagon, hexagon, 5, 6, 8 sides. The first thing you do is you insert it into a square. Triangular city, we draw imaginary lines and we put it into a square. And then we count outside of that created square 2,000 amot past that. Now, how do you make a square? See, here I drew on the triangle, the square goes out from the bottom. But the truth is, the square that we create, says the Rambam, you have to follow compass directions. Such that each side of your created square matches a given compass direction. This side will be north. This side will be west. This side will be south. This side will be east. So you see it over here, for example. These are the compass, north, south, east, and west. You have a triangular city. The square is going to be drawn parallel to the compass, not parallel to the city. So the square becomes like this, and the triangle kind of is bent somewhat in the square. Same thing over here. If you have a hexagonal city with 6 sides, you make one side fully north, west, south, and then east. Let's say the city was like a trapezoid. You have it over here on the right side. Wider on one side, narrower on the other. We treat it as if it's fully wide. We go after the wider borders, and that's where we draw the square. If it was made like an L, Gam is a Greek letter, and so here you can see on the left here, forget the shaded area, just the actual city is like an L shape. So what you do is like this. Or it was made like a bow. And I'll get to the bow in a second. Let's just first talk about the L. If between the two ends, 2 corners here, 2 furthest corners, if there's less than 4,000 amot, modedin la min hayeter, then we count the 2,000 amot from that line. He calls it a yeter because, like on a bow, you have the round, and then you have the line where you hold onto the arrows. That's called the yeter. So here too, imagine that this L is like a bow, somewhat, and this is the line. So if this line is less than 4,000 amot, we count the 2,000 amot from here. In other words, we draw an imaginary line, and we begin to count 2,000 from this edge, such that if you're living over here on this corner, you're going to end up with much more than 2,000 amot to walk. And we see the entire distance between the line of the bow and the round part of the bow, as if it's full of homes. But if between the two ends there was 4,000 amot, we only count from the bow. In other words, from every individual point on this line here, they can count 2,000 amot, and that's their limit to walk. You'll see it clearer over here when it comes to the actual keshet city, a city which is actually like a bow. So it's literally round. If you have less than 4,000 amot on this line, we fill this up imaginarily with homes, and everybody can walk 2,000 amot down here. But if there's more than 4,000 amot, then on every point of the bow, you draw out 2,000 amot, and that's where they can walk. That's how most commentaries understand this halacha. Other commentaries say a little bit more nuanced. They say, if you have a bow where the two edges of the bow is more than 4,000 amot, but as you enter deeper into the arch, you're going to reach a point where the distance between the two edges is less than 4,000 amot. Once you reach that edge, say these commentaries, we fill up everything and we say the 2,000 amot starts from here. That's what it means, ein modedin la'ela min hakeshet. Not that every point on the bow has to follow its own 2,000 amot. We find the point where the distance is less than 4,000 amot, and from there, the 2,000 amot begin for every other point on the bow. Halakha tet. Ir sheyoshevet al sfat hanachal. If you have a city that's sitting on the bank of a river, im yesh lefaneha daka rochav arba amot al sfat hanachal. If you have on the edge of the river bank, you have a daka, which means a thin plank, but it's pretty. I shouldn't say thin. It's a plank that's 4 amot wide. It's about 6 feet wide on the edge of the river. Which allows them to stand on this plank and use the water or the stuff in the river. That allows the river to be included in the measures of the city. And we only begin to count the 2,000 amot from the other edge of the river. And the entire river becomes converted into part of the city because of the thin plank built on its side. But if there was no plank, you only count from where the entrance to their home begins, such that the river will be counted as part of the 2,000 amot, not as part of the city. People who live in huts. We only begin to count the 2,000 amot from the entrance to their homes. But if they're in kind of groups, let's call it 3 courtyards of 2 homes each, they become one big city. We make a square around it, and we treat them like any other city, which gets 2,000 amot to every direction outside of the border of this makeshift city. Halakha Yud Aleph. Now let's talk about actually measuring. How do we actually measure the 2,000 amot? Someone's got to sit there with a ruler of some type and figure out where the distance is. It says the Rambam, Ein modedin ela bechevel shel 50 ama. We only use a rope that's 50 amot. That's how we go. 50 by 50 by 50. You keep counting. Lo pachot v'lo yater. Not more, not less. Ubechevel shel pishtan. We use specifically a linen rope. Kedei shelo yimashech yater midai, so it shouldn't be too stretchy. Because even if you have a 50 amma rope, but 2 people on each side stretching it will get a little longer. Higia legai, if the person measuring comes into a crevice, a hole in the ground. Im hayar rochbo 50 amma, sheyachol lahavlio bechevel hamida. If the width of the hole, of the ditch, is 50 amot, such that if you were standing on one side or on the other side, it would all be swallowed within the distance of the rope, mavlio, do that. V'hu sheyeh be'omko pachot me'arbat alafim. So long as the depth of it is less than 4,000 amot. Because if it's more than 4,000 amot, you have to consider as though you can walk down the crevice and walk back up, and the 2,000 amot will actually go this way. Versus if it's less than 4,000 amot depth and less than 50 amot, you simply cross. You just take the rope and you cross it, and the 2,000 amot continue to be counted outside of that. Halakha Yud Bet B'Med Dvarim Amurim. When do we say this? B'shehaya chut hamishkolet yored kenegdo. If the incline of the crevice was so steep that if you drop the plumb line, it would go directly downwards. Where you cannot use the sides of this crevice. But if the walls of the crevice aren't so steep that if you drop the plumb line, it would not go straight down. It would go on a diagonal. Eino mavlio. You don't get to swallow it within the 2,000 amot. Unless its depth was 2,000 amot or less. That's the only time that you can swallow it. But if once it's more than 2,000 amot, you got to consider the entire count of the incline as part of the 2,000 amot. Halacha Yud Gimel Haya Gai Me'ukam. This halacha has been the subject of much debate. We're going to go with the simplest explanation of it, and we're going to translate Gai Me'ukam as a crevice which has uneven ends. On the one end, it's higher than on the other end. So now, unlike when it's an even crevice and you can simply stand on one side and the other side and take your 50 amma rope, here when it's diagonal, you have to account for that inaccuracy. So the Rambam says, Mekader ve'oleh, mekader ve'yored. you're going to follow the system that's called kidur. And we're going to have this more in halachat tet zayin, in just a couple of halachot, how the system of kidur works. Essentially what it means is you cannot measure diagonals. What you have to do is you have to stretch out a straight rope this way, and then go down a little bit, and then put the straight rope again that way. So you get an accurate depiction of how much straight space there is on this diagonal. This way you don't have to end up with a messed up measurement because of the diagonal. If the crevice in this case was wider than 50 amot, where you cannot take it into the distance of the rope, you can walk along the edge of the crevice till where you could swallow it. So here you see, the guy walked out of the city, begins to measure, he comes to a crevice that's more than 50 amot. So he takes a walk to where it's less, puts the rope over the measurement over here, where it's 50 amot or less, and then once he crosses, Sofeh, says the Rambam, Keneged Midato, he checks where would be the equivalent area opposite of where he came out with his measuring stick, v'chozer, and goes back to continue measuring the line of 2,000 amot outside the city. Halacha Yudalid, Higia lekotel, if you reached a wall on the way of your measuring. Ein omrim yikovet hakotel. We don't say you have to pierce the wall. In other words, as the commentaries explain, we're referring to a wall which is, the walls aren't exactly straight, so it's hard to know exactly how thick it is. So you might think that you have to literally set up poles and start measuring across the poles and figuring out the exact length or width of this wall. No. Simply estimate the width and keep going. But if the wall is such, on a kind of diagonal, where you could make use of the actual height of the wall, you must measure it extremely accurately to know and count that incline as part of the 2,000 amot, because a person could make use of that space. And if the walls were super straight, that a plumb line can go directly downwards, then you have to measure its thickness also exactly, because you have to know exactly how much it's taking up in your 2,000 amot. If you reached a mound or a mountain, if on the length of 5 amot it achieved a height of 10 tfachim, you simply consider, you don't have to go with the diagonal, you just go with the bottom, count it only as 5 amot, because if you went with diagonal, you're going to end up with more, counting more space. You count the bottom and you go back to your measurement. But if it was steeper, such that you can get to a height of 10 tfachim from within only a length of 4 amot, then you simply measure it, estimate it, and go on. But if it's so tall that you cannot just estimate it and capture it in your rope, for example, the width is more than 50 amot, you have to measure it slowly by the method of kidur. That's the Talmud's meaning of the statement. We have to mikadrin. We have to measure by approximation in the mountains. How do you measure by approximation in the mountains? Halachat tet zayin, says the Rambam, Ketzad mikadrin beharim o begeayot she'eno yachol lehavliyan. How do you measure on mountains or on valleys which you cannot swallow with your 50 amah rope? Ochazin shnayim chevel shel arba amot. You go very slowly. Take 2 people with a rope of 4 amot. And what you do is, העליון אוחז קצתו מכנגד מרגלותיו, והתחתון אוחז בקצה השני כנגד ליבו. The top guy holds it by his feet, and the bottom guy holds it next to his chest. So you're creating a straight line along the incline. וחוזר העליון לעמוד במקום התחתון. Then, while this guy is standing over here, he goes down and becomes the tachton, goes further down, and now he transfers the rope from his feet to his chest. And now the lower guy takes the length of the rope to him. And so you keep rolling and going till you get the measurement of the entire mountain by virtue of the straight line. So you're going to have 4 amot, 4 amot, 4 amot, 4, 4, and 4, and so you'll get the distance of, let's say, 16 or whatever it is, 24 amot, or whatever. I'm just choosing that example here, but any case according to its particulars. Now, when the guy who's measuring goes to try to swallow up this mountain or this rope or this crevice in his robe, he should never go past the tchum. This is referring to this case over here, where you couldn't cross. It was a bigger than 50 amah hole, but if you're going down to get a place where there is 50 amot and you can swallow it with your rope, but you can't go this way so far down that you're leaving 2,000 amot of the city on this side. So So passerby shouldn't see you. V'yomru midat tchumin ba'alekan. They're going to say, oh, the tchum Shabbat extends till there. How do we know? We saw the guy measuring. He's all the way down there. So keep your awareness about that, and never walk too far that people will come to make a mistake by following your measurements. When it comes to measurements, we have to rely on only experts. Who knows how to measure land. Let's say we knew where the border of Shabbos was. Everybody knew this city, the Tchum Shabbat goes till here. And an expert comes and he measures. And his measurement ends up being bigger or smaller. We only listen to him if he extends it further, not if he makes it less. And let's say you had two experts coming to begin with. Nobody knew where the tchum was. We hired two experts to do a measurement. And one comes up with a longer conclusion and one with a shorter conclusion. We listen to the one who makes it greater distance. So long as the margin of error is not bigger than the diagonal of the city. In other words, if you remember, we said before, when you have a square city, technically if you go 2,000 amot out of the city on this side, the diagonal of this to reach the edge of that square would be 2,800 amot. So long as we can use that margin of error to account for the difference between the two measurers, we'll go with that. In other words, we'll say the guy who came up with the lesser distance was going on a straight line. The guy who came up with a bigger distance was going on the diagonal line. But if the difference between them is so big that it can't even be accounted for by this, then we know someone's making a mistake. Keita, what does that mean? When we come with two experts and one guy is increasing, Nomar will say, Shema harishon mikeran alachson shel ir madad ha'alpayim. Maybe the first guy counted 2,000 amot from the corner of the city. Ulefichach mi'et midato. Therefore, he ended up with a smaller number, because if you go 2,000 on the diagonal, comes out to about 1428 on the straight. Such that the side of the tchum from the city between here and here would be less than 2,000 amot. Whereas the second guy measured from the side straight 2,000 amot. But we don't assume that the first guy made such a massive mistake that there should be a bigger difference than that. So therefore, so long as the second guy increased by anywhere up to 583 amot, 580 around, which is the difference between here and here, 1428 to 2000, Shomilo, we listen to him. But more than that, ain't Shomilo. We know the difference is too great. Somebody made a mistake, and you got to start again. Halacha yutet. Afilu eved, afilu shivcha. Even a slave or a maidservant, ne'emanin lomar, are believed to say, ad kan tchum Shabbat. We know until here is the border of the city. In other words, even though typically, when it comes to believing the testimony, a slave or a maidservant they don't qualify. But for this they do, because it's rabbinic. Gadol lomar. Also an adult is believed to say, Zachur ani, I remember, sha'ad kan ayinu ba'im b'Shabbat k'shiti katanim. When I was a child, we used to always walk till here. Typically, in many cases, an adult cannot use his childhood memory to verify certain information. But over here he could. We rely on his testimony in this matter. Because the sages only made their restrictions in a lenient way, not so much in a strict way. Because the whole amount of 2,000 amot is only rabbinic, so they kept it, with different leniencies. For example, people that are not usually believed for testimony will be believed in this area.